The cozy cabin in the woods. Elena had been driving for nearly 7 hours when the GPS signal died. The screen flickered once, twice, and then went dark, leaving her alone on a winding gravel road that cut through an endless forest of towering pines and ancient oaks. She pulled the rental car to the side, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cool evening air. The smell of damp earth and fresh pine filled her lungs, and for a long moment she stood there, letting the silence wash over her like a wave. It had been 3 months since the accident. 3 months of hospital waiting rooms, funeral arrangements, and the hollow ache of an empty house. Her grandmother's death had left a hole in Elena's life that she still did not know how to fill, and when the lawyer had called about the cabin, the one her grandmother had spoken of so fondly in her letters, Elena had packed a bag and driven west without a second thought. The forest was darker than she had expected. The sun had not yet set, but the canopy was so thick that only scattered shafts of golden light broke through, illuminating patches of moss and fern like tiny stages in a vast green theater. Elena checked the paper map she had printed before leaving, squinted at the faint pencil markings her grandmother had made decades ago, and decided to keep going. The cabin could not be far now. She drove slowly, the car bumping over roots and stones, branches scraping against the doors like bony fingers. 15 minutes later, the trees parted, and there it was. The cabin stood in a small clearing, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass that swayed gently in the breeze. It was exactly as her grandmother had described, a sturdy log structure with a steep roof, a stone chimney, and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, lazy spiral, though Elena knew no one had been here in years. The windows glowed with warm light, as if the cabin itself had been expecting her. Elena parked and walked up the flagstone path, her boots crunching on the gravel. The front door was unlocked, just as her grandmother's letter had said it would be. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was small but welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated the main wall, its fire already crackling and snapping as if it had been lit moments before her arrival. A worn leather armchair sat to one side, a knitted throw blanket draped over its arm. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes that ranged from classic literature to old field guides about mushrooms and birds. In the center of the room stood a sturdy wooden table with 2 chairs, and on the table sat a kerosene lantern that cast a soft amber glow across the space. Elena set down her bag and walked to the fireplace. The heat embraced her, and she held out her hands, watching the flames dance. She had expected dust and cobwebs, musty air, and the chill of abandonment. Instead, the cabin felt lived in, cared for, as if someone had been here just this morning. She explored the rest of the space. A small kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a pantry stocked with canned goods and dried herbs, a narrow staircase leading to a loft bedroom with a low ceiling and a bed piled high with quilts. In the bedroom, on the nightstand, lay a photograph in a silver frame, her grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of this very cabin, laughing at something the photographer had said. Elena picked up the frame and traced her finger along the glass. She had not known her grandmother as a young woman. She had known her as the quiet, kind presence who had baked cookies and told stories and always smelled of lavender and wood smoke. But here, in this photograph, was someone else, someone who had built a life in these woods, who had chosen solitude and found something worth keeping. She unpacked slowly, hanging her clothes in a small wooden wardrobe, placing her toiletries in the bathroom that had been added sometime in the 70s, judging by the fixtures. The cabin had no electricity, but there was propane for the stove and the refrigerator, and a generator in the shed out back. Her grandmother had been prepared for everything. That first night, Elena built up the fire, heated a can of soup on the stove, and sat at the wooden table with a book she had found on the shelf, a collection of fairy tales from the region, illustrated with woodcut prints. She read by lantern light as the wind picked up outside and the trees began to sway and whisper. The cabin creaked and settled around her, and for the first time in months, Elena felt something other than grief. She slept deeply that night, wrapped in quilts that smelled of cedar and lavender, the fire crackling low in the hearth below. She dreamed of her grandmother walking through the forest, pointing at mushrooms and birds, naming each one with the easy familiarity of someone who had lived among them for decades. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through the small window above the bed. She lay still for a moment, listening to the birds outside, the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of water running over rocks. She had forgotten what silence sounded like when it was not filled with the hum of traffic and the buzz of notifications. She made coffee on the propane stove, strong and dark, and took it out onto the porch. The morning air was crisp and clean, and the clearing was alive with activity, squirrels chasing each other around the trunks of oaks, a blue jay scolding from a high branch, butterflies drifting through the wildflowers like scattered petals. Elena sat in the rocking chair and watched, feeling the tension in her shoulders begin to ease for the first time in months. On the third day, she found the journal. It was hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the bed, wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a leather string. Elena had been sweeping the loft when she noticed the board was slightly raised, and curiosity got the better of her. She pried it up with a butter knife and found the bundle. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle, filled with her grandmother's handwriting. But it was not the handwriting Elena remembered from birthday cards and letters. This was smaller, tighter, more urgent. And it was not addressed to anyone. The first entry was dated October 12, 1967. I have found the door, it began. It lies behind the old oak at the northern edge of the property, where the roots form a kind of arch. I do not know what lies beyond it, but I feel it calling to me. I have felt it since the day I arrived. Elena read the entry 3 times, trying to make sense of it. A door? Behind an oak tree? She thought of her grandmother's letters, so full of practical advice about weatherproofing and wood storage and which mushrooms were safe to eat. There was never any mention of doors or mysteries. She read on. Over the following days, the journal chronicled her grandmother's exploration of the woods around the cabin. She had mapped every trail, every stream, every outcropping of rock. And she had found things that did not quite fit, stones arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate, trees that grew in circles, a pond that reflected the stars even during the day. And always, the door. I went back to the oak today, another entry read. The arch formed by the roots is exactly as I remembered it. I walked through it, and for a moment, I was somewhere else. The air smelled different, sweeter, older. I saw lights in the distance, like fireflies, but they were too large and too bright. I turned back. I was not ready. Elena looked up from the journal, her heart beating faster. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm and golden, and the forest looked perfectly ordinary. But she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the cabin had given her a secret it had been keeping for decades. She spent the rest of the day reading. The journal spanned 30 years, from 1967 to 1997. Her grandmother had visited the door many times, sometimes passing through it, sometimes merely standing at its threshold. She described a world of perpetual twilight, where the trees glowed with soft light and strange, gentle creatures moved through the shadows. She called it the Between. I met a woman there, an entry from 1972 read. She called herself the Keeper. She said she had been watching the door for longer than she could remember. She asked me why I had come, and I told her the truth. I did not know. She smiled and said that was the best reason. The Keeper appeared in many entries after that. She taught Elena's grandmother about the Between, its seasons, its creatures, its rhythms. She showed her how to find the other doors that dotted the forest, how to read the signs in the growth of moss and the flight of birds. And she warned her that the Between was not a place to be taken lightly. The door does not open for everyone, the Keeper told her, as recorded in a 1975 entry. It opens for those who need it. You needed it when you came here, Sarah. You were running from something. But you stopped running, and that is why the door showed itself to you. Sarah. Her grandmother's name. Elena had not thought of her as Sarah in a long time. She had been Grandma, warm and constant and safe. But here, in these pages, she was Sarah, a young woman who had come to the woods looking for something she could not name and had found a doorway to another world. The last entry was dated September 3, 1997. I have not been through the door in 3 years. The Keeper says it is because I no longer need it. The Between was a gift for a time when I was lost, and now I am found. I leave this journal for whoever comes next. If you are reading this, you are the one the door has been waiting for. Do not be afraid. The door does not open for everyone. It opened for you. Elena closed the journal and sat in the silence of the loft, the weight of her grandmother's words pressing against her chest. She thought about the accident, about the long months of grief, about the feeling that she had been drifting through her own life without direction. She had come to the cabin looking for peace. But perhaps she had been looking for something else entirely. That evening, she did not light the fire. Instead, she took the lantern and walked to the northern edge of the property, following the faint trail her grandmother had marked on a map tucked into the back of the journal. The forest was different at dusk, deeper, darker, full of sounds she could not identify. But she kept walking, her boots finding the path as if they remembered it from another life. The old oak stood at the edge of a small clearing, its branches spreading wide and its roots rising from the earth in thick, twisted arcs. Between two of the largest roots, there was an opening, just tall enough for a person to walk through. It looked like nothing more than a gap between the roots of a very old tree. But as Elena approached, she felt something shift in the air, a change in pressure, a change in sound, a change in the quality of the light. She ducked and stepped through. On the other side, the world was different. The sky was a deep twilight blue, scattered with stars that seemed closer and brighter than any she had ever seen. The trees were silver and slender, their leaves humming with a faint luminescence. The air was warm and still, and it smelled of honey and rain. Elena stood at the threshold of the Between, her lantern casting a small circle of light around her. She was not afraid. She felt, instead, a sense of recognition, as if she had been here before, in dreams she had forgotten the moment she woke. She walked forward, and the trees parted to reveal a path paved with smooth, pale stones. Fireflies, or things like fireflies, drifted around her, their light pulsing in a gentle rhythm. In the distance, she saw a structure, low and curved, made of the same silver wood as the trees. A light glowed from within. She walked toward it, and as she drew closer, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was a woman, tall and slender, with silver hair that seemed to float around her shoulders as if underwater. Her eyes were pale blue, like winter sky, and she was smiling. "Hello, Elena," the woman said. "I am the keeper. I have been expecting you." Elena stopped. "You know my name." "Of course," the keeper said. "I knew your grandmother. And I have been watching the door for you. It opened the moment you decided to come here. It has been waiting for you, just as it waited for Sarah." They sat together in the keeper's dwelling, a round room with a fire pit in the center and walls that seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of the forest outside. The keeper told Elena about the between, how it existed alongside the ordinary world, a place of transition and transformation. How some people stumbled into it by accident, and others were called. "Your grandmother was called," the keeper said. "She came here broken, and she left whole. The between does not fix people, Elena. It shows them what they are capable of fixing themselves." Elena talked about the accident, about her grandmother's death, about the emptiness that had hollowed her out. She talked until her voice was raw and her eyes were dry, and the keeper listened without interrupting, without offering advice, simply being present in a way that Elena had not experienced since her grandmother was alive. When she was done, the keeper stood and walked to a shelf carved into the wall. She took down a small wooden box and handed it to Elena. Inside was a key, simple, iron, unadorned. "This is the key to the cabin," the keeper said. "Your grandmother wanted you to have it. But more than that, it is a reminder. You belong here, Elena. You belong in both worlds. The door will always open for you now." Elena closed the box and held it against her chest. She thought about the life she had left behind, the apartment, the job, the endless cycle of work and sleep and numb distraction. She thought about the life she might build here, in the quiet of the forest, with the door to the between always waiting. When she stepped back through the oak tree, the sun was rising. She walked back to the cabin, its windows glowing with the light of the new day, and she knew that she was home. Over the weeks that followed, Elena settled into a rhythm she had never known she craved. She rose with the sun, made coffee, and sat on the porch to watch the forest wake. She tended the garden her grandmother had planted, pulling weeds and watering the tomatoes and herbs. She repaired the porch steps, replaced a cracked window pane, and learned to split wood with an axe that had been her grandfather's. And she visited the between. She went through the door at different times, dawn, noon, dusk, midnight, and found that the between changed with the hours. At dawn, it was misty and quiet, the silver trees dripping with dew. At noon, the light was golden and warm, and the creatures were active, small, delicate beings with translucent wings who darted between the trees like living jewels. At dusk, the sky turned violet and the fireflies emerged in clouds, their light painting the world in shades of green and blue. And at midnight, the between was silent and still, the stars so bright they cast shadows, and Elena would sit with the keeper and talk until her voice gave out. She learned about the history of the between, how it had been a refuge for centuries, a place where the weary and the lost could find rest. She learned about the other doors, scattered across the world, each one keyed to a person who needed to find it. And she learned about the price. The between asks for something in return, the keeper told her one night. Not payment, exactly. But those who pass through the door must leave something behind. A memory. A fear. A piece of grief you no longer need to carry. Elena understood. She had been carrying her grief like a stone in her chest, heavy and immovable. But here, in the twilight of the between, she felt it begin to lighten. She did not leave it behind all at once, it was not that simple. But she set it down, piece by piece, each time she passed through the door. And the between held it for her, transforming her sorrow into something soft and bearable. Spring turned to summer. The cabin was surrounded by green, the wildflowers blooming in waves of color that changed with each passing week. Elena learned the names of the birds and the trees and the constellations that wheeled above the clearing at night. She wrote letters to friends she had not spoken to in years, reconnecting with the parts of herself she had let wither. She painted the shutters a deep forest green and planted lavender along the path, just as her grandmother had done. One evening in late August, Elena sat on the porch with the keeper. The old woman had come through the door for the first time in years, curious about the woman Sarah's granddaughter had become. "Your grandmother loved this place," the keeper said, looking out at the clearing. "She loved it more than any place I have ever known. But she loved the between, too. She was torn between two worlds, and that is a difficult thing." "Was she happy?" Elena asked. The keeper smiled. "More than anyone I have ever met. Because she chose to be. She chose to love both worlds, and she chose to be grateful for the doors that connected them. That is the secret, Elena. Happiness is not a destination. It is a choice you make every time you step through a door." Elena thought about this for a long time. She thought about the choices she had made, to come here, to read the journal, to step through the oak. Each one had led her here, to this moment, on this porch, with the woman who had known her grandmother better than anyone. "I think I understand," she said. The keeper nodded and stood. "I should go. But I will be here when you need me. The door is always open." She walked down the steps and crossed the clearing, her silver hair catching the last light of the sun. At the edge of the forest, she turned and raised her hand. Then she stepped between the trees and was gone. That night, Elena built a fire and sat in the leather armchair with the journal in her lap. She had read it cover to cover many times now, but tonight she opened it to a blank page at the back, found a pen in her bag, and began to write. "Today I understood something I have been trying to understand my whole life. Happiness is not something you find. It is something you build. It is the fire you light, the garden you tend, the door you choose to walk through. It is the cabin in the woods that welcomes you home." She closed the journal and placed it back beneath the floorboard, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with leather string, waiting for whoever might come next. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the pines. And Elena sat in the cozy cabin in the woods, at peace with the world and with herself, knowing that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The morning came soft and gray, rain tapping gently on the roof. Elena woke to the sound and lay still, listening. She had always loved the rain, the way it made the world feel smaller, more intimate, as if the cabin were a ship sailing through a sea of green and gray. She made tea and sat by the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. The forest looked different in the rain, the colors deeper, the shapes softer. She thought about the between and wondered what it looked like in weather like this. She would check later. That afternoon, the rain stopped, and the sun broke through the clouds in long, golden shafts. Elena pulled on her boots and walked to the old oak. She ducked through the roots and stepped into the between. The world was dripping and fresh, every leaf and blade of grass covered in tiny beads of water that caught the light like diamonds. The air was clean and cool, and the luminescence of the silver trees seemed brighter than usual, as if the rain had washed away a film of dust. She walked the path to the keeper's dwelling, but the dwelling was empty. There was no fire in the pit, no sign that anyone had been here recently. On the shelf where the wooden box had been, there was a note. "Gone traveling," it read. "The between is calling me elsewhere. But the door is still open. Take care of it while I am away." Elena smiled and folded the note into her pocket. She walked back through the door, into the clearing, and stood for a moment in the sunlight. She was the keeper now. At least for a while. And that was just fine.